Today we're talking about how to choose a very important person in your support crew, your lawyer or your conveyancer. And we have a guest expert here to help us out.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
We're going to introduce him in a moment, but before we do, if you're watching the video, Meighan likes to have an interesting dwelling behind
Finding these.
so what is your special house this week?
Well, Queensland, Brisbane, Gold Coast recently went through some fairly torrential weather. Let's call it cyclone that didn't really happen for us, but certainly hit the Gold Coast. This is a houseboat, and for some people, I'm sure they would have liked to have had something to float in because there was a lot of flooding. But this particular one, you can hire. So you can hire this one in Alapia in India. So a really interesting way to see parts of India if you're so inclined.
There you go. It looks a bit like a floating basket. One of those floating fishing baskets. Yeah. It's interesting. Alrighty, though. Let's kick into what we're talking about today. Our guest today is George Sourris from Empire Legal in Brisbane. And if you've checked out his website, which you might well do after this, you'll see that they really want to be friendly. So
yeah, very approachable.
Very approachable. So that's why we couldn't resist getting him on, because it's unusual you meet a really approachable lawyer. No, I'm being unfair on lawyers. There's a lot of good lawyers out there.
All right. Welcome, George.
Hello, ladies. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. All right. Shall we kick off with an obvious question?
Oh, let's go.
Okay. What is the difference between a conveyancer and a lawyer?
All right. So a lawyer has done a law degree, so a Bachelor of Laws, and they're admitted in Australia to practice the law. Whereas a conveyancer, that's actually a question within itself. This varies state by state. So Empire Legal, we're based up in Queensland. So we only do work throughout Queensland for helping people buy or sell a house. In Queensland, there's no formal qualification called a conveyancer. However, I know that in some of the southern states, Victoria, New South Wales, I believe you can do like a licensed conveyancing course where you get a qualification to be able to convey a property. So that's effectively, if you're a conveyancer, you help people buy or sell their homes with that qualification. Up here in Queensland, all the conveyancing is done by lawyers under law firms with paralegals assisting in that capacity. So that's a really, really good question. So there's no real conveyancers in Queensland. They're actually paralegals, which that within itself could be anyone. Like that could be either of you guys. You could come and work with us today and you could technically be a paralegal and you could help someone buy or sell their house under the supervision of a lawyer.
And I think that's the important point, because Veronica and I have had conveyancers on previously, and I think you articulated it far better than I ever have in the past, and that is you don't have a conveyancer in Queensland, you have a solicitor. And the conveyance is done perhaps by anyone who works in the solicitor's firm, but it is under the supervision of a solicitor. Very different to New South Wales, Veronica.
And most other states in my understanding. So that is actually really interesting because I did not know that. And I know that you've always said, oh, yeah, we don't use conveyancers up here, but I actually thought it was a preference, not the fact that they didn't exist. So,
George has nailed it. He's finally got, after 3 years of trying to tell you, he's got it right.
3, I think we're up to 5. But anyway, let's just, park that for the moment. So I think that is important because we do, in a way, we use the terms interchangeably here because we're talking about the conveyancing process, which also can be misunderstood. So we'll get into what that is in a minute. But so before we sort of get further into all of that, are all lawyers familiar with the conveyancing process?
Another excellent question. They may have studied 1 or 2 property law subjects at university. In saying that, there's a lot of lawyers that choose not to practice in property law or conveyancing because it's quite an onerous area of the law. There's a lot going on. There's time-sensitive deadlines, regardless of what state you're in. So they may know about it, but I'd say it's a very niche area of practice. Like to give you guys context, we only do conveyancing by design. Like we want to just do property law, and we have actually sandboxed that just to Queensland. Like we can't help people interstate. Well, we technically, legally, we could. We've got the ticket to do it, but we choose not to. Obviously, all the laws are different. So it's a very niche area. There's a lot of moving parts for the one particular section.
Yeah.
And that's really important for people to understand, isn't it? Because I know that we've had clients in the past in our buyer's agency business who have had a friend who's a lawyer, but they don't really do any conveyancing. And honestly, it is hard slog to work with those people when they don't really intimately know the conveyance process and also the local government intricacies in terms of what you need and how to get that information. So I think it's really important that you're always focusing on getting someone who specialises in property transaction and conveyance because, as you say, there's so much to it.
I'd be doing people a disservice to help them in another state because I haven't done the deals down there. It's totally different. Same as if you guys were, going through a divorce or you had a criminal matter, I'd turn you away because I'm not an expert in that area. I don't practice there.
Oh, I wish every lawyer was like you, George, because so many just go, oh, yeah, the conveyance is just easy, that it's just a contract, so big deal. It's just contract law. It's really easy. And I have heard lawyers say that. So, and I think that that's hard for first home buyers in particular when they're trying to find out somebody to help them through the conveyancing process, which, as I said, we will get to what that process entails. It's really hard for them because they actually don't know. And so for them to tell the difference between somebody who's just, is a lawyer and has done their 1 or 2 modules at uni versus somebody who has chosen to specialise in that space. So are there sort of some telltales that you would think that buyers could, look
some
for
tips
or questions that they could ask that would give the game away to them?
Yeah, I can certainly share with you guys sort of what I would suggest people look for when selecting a conveyancer or a solicitor. I boil it down to one thing, and that's reputation. So, trusting social proof, what does that look like? I'd say a good source of truth is something like Google reviews. So peer-reviewed, if someone's got hundreds or thousands of reviews with a really high average, like 5-star or close to it, you'd probably say it's a pretty safe bet that these guys know what they're doing in that niche. In saying that, sometimes a professional referral may not even be the source of truth. We have lots of professionals that refer work to us, from buyer's agents to seller's agents, bankers, brokers, friends. But you know what? I think that the source of all truth is that social proof on Google, because some referrers are actually getting paid by lawyers for those introductions, which muddies the water a little bit. They might be getting a $50, $100 in pocket for the intro. So that's another whole thing. Like we don't receive or give any kickbacks in our firm. We just go off sort of, hey, we get referred because we do a good job type thing. But that's the number one thing I would say that sticks out to me is the reputation of the people that you're trusting to help you buy or sell this very expensive property. Probably it's the biggest thing going on in most people's lives, as you guys would know in the buyer's agent space. And We can dig a bit deeper into some other bits and pieces, but that's the kicker for me is picking someone that's reputable to look after you and guide you through the process.
Yeah, it's point. I was going to say, this is what we do, George. We both have these leverage, so we might go.
You go first, Meighan.
I'm nuts. I was going to say, full disclosure, George has looked after a number of our clients in Property Pursuit, our buyer's agency. So we have used Empire Legal, and we never just recommend one. We always give people a choice of 3 that we know are going to do a good job, and the feedback that we get is exceptional. But we certainly are aware that there are and have been offered incentives by other law firms to refer people to them, and that's just not something that we engage in.
Sort of interesting too, because I know, obviously, I don't work with George because my buyer's agency is in Sydney, and you've just said you don't work in our area, so that's all good. But I know the lawyers and the conveyancers that we work with. It's interesting because sometimes you will get someone come to us. Our clients will come to us, with a lawyer sometimes already. And I have one conversation with them and I know whether they're going to be any good or not, and the client often doesn't realize they're not a great lawyer or conveyancer because the client they've never had a sticky situation, or they just don't know what they don't know. You know what I mean? So 'cause sometimes even, when your friend refers somebody, it's like, well, did you have it difficult, or was there any challenges or any red flags that had to be investigated or anything like that? Or was it really simple and easy, in which case you think they're a great lawyer, but actually it could be something you don't even know about. So I think that this is a problem with referrals. So I guess what you're saying there, George, is the weight of heaps and heaps and heaps of reviews is great, but individually it's a challenge when you're getting referrals from friends and family, and even some professionals, like you say, could be conflicted. So let's talk about what the conveyancing process is, because, from where I'm sitting, it's like in 2 stages. Is before you go unconditional or effectively buy the property, and it's then between going unconditional or exchange of contracts as you do in New South Wales, and then settlement. So there's 2 really distinct phases. So can you talk to us about that and some of the things that you should be looking for, because we always encourage people to get a lawyer involved earlier than they often think that they need one. And so I'd love you to talk to that and what a really good property specialist will be doing at the front end.
Yes, that is a great question. I'll do my best to phrase it in a way that applies to all the states, because when we do it a little bit differently, we don't really exchange contracts up here. It's a bit of a different process.
Yep.
But I'll just talk generally. So the most important part is pre-contract advice. So engaging that lawyer, it's not, there's those 2 phases, right? But the way that we do business is from right up before a client signs a contract or, even formally engages us, we will help them through understanding. That's the big thing, right? You're paying a professional, the lawyer, the conveyancer, for that service from, I wouldn't even say start to finish. I'd say before you start until after you finish, if you look at the actual transaction. So if this is the transaction, there is a period of time sort of before we actually do work where we'll explain, hey, the conveyance is, all we're doing is we're helping you purchase or sell that property, but you got to know what's it going to cost, what are the time frames, what other professionals are involved, things like your banker, your broker, if there's a buyer's agent involved, pre-approval. So for us, that pre-contract advice for buyers, we offer that as part of our service. We run a fixed fee model, which you'll find a lot of lawyers, conveyancers around the country will do just to be competitive, which feeds into the pricing aspect, right? So we do it transparently. We make it very simple on our website, one price to buy, one price to sell all across the state, nice and easy. But back to that pre-contract advice, we want to check over that contract for a buyer and make sure there's no traps or tricks or, funny wording, special condition others that could, be detrimental to the buyer. Working in conjunction with buyer's agents, like it's great when we have deals with buyer's agents because it's same team, right? Like you guys and us work together to make sure our client's protected. And that runs through all the way to battling conditions like building and pest or finance, getting ready to settle, liaising with the banks, pre-settlement inspections, settling the property, and then beyond. So for us, we always get clients asking after the fact, maybe they've sold their property. Oh, George, I just got this water bill or this rates bill. What do I do? You know, that's still part of our service. They're still our client. So if you've sold the property, that's all good. You can ignore that because it's no longer your property. The buyer's going to own. What we like to do is, if that's the case, we'll actually pass it on to the buyer and say, hey, FYI, buyer's solicitors, give this to your client. It's a bill. So it's that the Rolls-Royce experience of looking after that client, right? It's not just a transaction. We're there to guide them throughout the whole journey.
Yeah, and for a lot of first home buyers, as you said earlier, Veronica, for a lot of first home buyers, it's what they don't know that they don't know that is scary to us, but not scary to them. And, you know, elevating their knowledge to be risk averse enough to ask the right questions of professionals, the right questions is, you know, the cornerstone of what we want to do in educating first home buyers. To know, when do I talk to the solicitor? You know, that pre-contract advice is incredibly important. In New South Wales and Victoria, a solicitor prepares the contract. So you have to talk to your solicitor. In Queensland, of course, the real estate agent prepares the contract. So you then have to have your wits about you to say, all right, I'm not going to sign this until I've spoken to a solicitor about this.
Do you know, even in New South Wales and Victoria, buyers can sign a contract without having it reviewed by a lawyer. And they get a cooling off period. They can't waive that without involvement of a lawyer. But they still can sign themselves and commit themselves in ways that they're often unaware of. And, you know, and agents will encourage you. You know, look, it's okay. You get a cooling off period. They don't necessarily say that, look, you know, if you do cool off, it's going to cost you, or you have the option of actually taking the contract to a lawyer and getting some advice on that before you sign, even with a cooling off period, you know. Or another one in New South Wales in particular, in that cooling off period, you can't renegotiate any of those clauses if your lawyer doesn't like them. So there's lots of reasons why the agent would just, yeah, it's fine, because technically, legally, it is, you can sign, but what is best practice from a buyer's point of view? And so that's sort of what, you know, we wanted to bring George along for, because I'm sure, George, you've seen a number of situations where people have come to you because, yes, they've got to get a lawyer involved at some point, but they've made mistakes or done things before coming to you that you can't fix. Have you got some examples you can give us off the top of your head?
Every day of the week, yes. This happens all the time, especially here, because it is the norm that the real estate agents are drafting the contracts. The lawyers aren't involved in the drafting at all. So, and it's optional to get the contract reviewed on the buyer's solicitor side. It's not mandatory. In fact, another nuance between the southern states, a buyer can waive their cooling off here without that. I think it's called a Form 66W down in Wales, which is a solicitor's advice explaining what the risk is involved. Up here, it's just a one-pager that can be sort of
printed and signed.
Yeah, printed and signed, and then you've waived your cooling off. You've waived your statutory right to get out of that contract. And if that's an unconditional contract, i.e., you know, no building and pest or finance, you're locked in. And if you're a first home buyer that doesn't even know what's going on, it's your first time doing this, have no idea of the repercussions of what you've done. Like, you don't know what you don't know, like you were saying.
Yeah.
So this is a really cool conversation because it can bring awareness to people, especially in a jurisdiction like Queensland where it's optional to get this advice. Like because we're fixed fee, right? It's part of our service and we don't charge per phone call or per email or anything like that. Like our whole goal is to educate and look after our clients throughout the conveyance to help them. So some examples, waiving cooling off, that's a great one. That can be waived and they don't even know it. Another one in Queensland with the finance clause, there's 3 little sections that have to be filled out. If all 3 sections aren't completed, the clause is invalid and doesn't apply. So if you miss, and that could be as simple as one of those 3 little bits not filled out, guess what? You've got no finance clause. That's pretty scary.
Yep.
That's another one that we see quite often.
Oh, do you?
We do.
That's interesting.
And you know what? It's usually by more like smaller agencies that maybe don't have that big administrative support. Like you find a lot of the big brands now on the sales side will have a central contracts admin that will catch that. It's really cool. Like just another line of protection before the contract gets distributed. But yeah, that is still a trap that we see quite regularly.
Amazing.
Wow. And
There's a tip for everybody.
And that's scary. It's super scary. Like if you need finance and you haven't yet got it, and then all of a sudden
You've missed one line.
and you don't get pre-contract advice. So we look over the contract and we advise our clients saying, hey, big red flag here. If you think you've got finance, it looks like you put 21 days, but you've missed the other sections. Guess what? You don't. So we need to amend that before you sign. Whereas a lot of the time, the majority of clients don't get that pre-contract advice. So we'll be, we'll just get the contract in our inbox from the agent going, hey, the buyer's selected Empire Legal. We go and obviously look over that contract immediately to make sure, you know, deposits have pretty quick deadlines, got to make sure they get paid. And we'll look over the contract and have a look and go, oh, finance clause not filled out. Ring the client, hey, do you think you have a finance clause? Well, hey, maybe you don't. And then we have to go and ask very kindly to the seller's solicitors and the seller's agent, saying, well, it seems like the parties intended for this finance clause to be there. Can we please add it in? But they're not obliged to agree. So, yeah, it's a bit of a tricky situation, that.
Oh,
Wow.
frightening.
It is frightening because people are committing themselves in so many ways that they're just blithely unaware of. I remember when I was filming, I used to host a television show called Location, Location, Location. And we used to go around the whole country buying property in other states. And my co-host, Bryce, he'd worked in Queensland, he'd worked in WA and in Victoria. And I'd only ever worked in New South Wales. And he was like, oh my God, your system is so complicated. And I'm like, I prefer complication. It makes me feel safer. The Queensland way of just, there you go, just here you go, print it off, sign it. It just felt so airy-fairy to me. But that's because I was sort of aware of what I could be potentially committing, our people to, not myself. And so this is, it's that sort of danger zone. It's like the blissful unawareness that we're trying to sort of make sure nobody falls into accidentally here. Because there's a lot of other things too. There's like building and pest clauses, but also in Queensland, in different states, you get different amount of documentation that gets given to you by the agent from the vendor. So, and it's called vendor disclosure, right? So in New South Wales, I'll just give you one example, and you get this same document in Victoria, you get the same one in New South Wales, and there's some other states you do. I don't think you don't get it in Tasmania, you don't get it in WA. I think you do in South Australia, but it's a sewerage diagram. And you would think, why do I need a sewerage diagram? It's actually a really important document. We get so much information from the sewerage diagram, and you guys don't get it. So like if you're going to build a pool in your backyard, for example, you want to know where the sewer line is, right? So you've got to get there's quite a lot of information that's not readily at hand there, which is going to change, obviously, in your state because it's being legislated. But currently, and for however long, people could accidentally buy a property thinking they're going to be able to do one thing with it and actually not. And so how does a lawyer come into that, George? How does a lawyer help you in those sorts of circumstances?
Yeah, that's another really, really good point. And believe it or not, it is more common than you think. Again, we do have the seller's disclosure changing on the 1st of August this year, 2025. Finally, we are obliging a pack of information to be disclosed up front by the vendor. But it's a caveat emptor in Latin. They call it buyer beware up here. A common example, let's talk about this sewerage main that you're talking about. It was only about 12 months ago that the REIQ, which is the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, the standardised contracts we use up here, they added in a clause there that allowed a buyer termination rights in the event that something like a sewer main that traverses or passes through the property is found. So good may not be the right word, prudent selling agents may attach those asset maps just to get ahead of the game because...
Yeah. And they're freely available. You don't have to pay for them. They're freely available.
You did, yeah.
You need to know to do it. Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, you guys in your due diligence process, I'm sure that...
We do, absolutely.
Yeah, of things you're looking...
Before we even inspect the property.
Yeah, and that's like number one. Like, is there
Blood
something?
first.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we're especially Cyclone Alfred, Queensland, exactly, right? So you look at, all right, what's the intended future use of the property? I think that's a really powerful question that we ask is like, what do you want this property for? Are you trying to do a subdivision? Do you want to do an extension? Are you happy with it as it is? And then those searches will reveal. So we, as part of our process, will look for things like sewer mains, for example. And if it's there and it's passing with stormwater, if it's passing through the property right where this buyer wants to put their deck and their pool in a couple of years' time, we've got a problem, right? In saying that and feeding back into this overarching umbrella of like when you're picking a solicitor or a conveyancer, the really stripped down cheap guys, because there's guys that will say, you know, we can do it for half the price of the other guys, but they're not doing searches, they're taking shortcuts, there may be a bit of a different model where they're just trying to keep it cheap. Say as part of service, we want to check that nothing is going to impact the property to affect your enjoyment. And say, for example, that sewer main is there. Now, as of about 12 months ago, when REIQ changed the laws, you can now terminate the contract.
Right.
Yes. However, rewind, we're talking only back, 2023, 2024 has changed, where you couldn't beforehand. Say we found that sewer main and the contract was unconditional. Your only remedy is to reserve your rights to sue the seller or the agent down the track. And you still have. So we had a real example. We have a suburb called Manly, which is near the Bayside. Really beautiful, right on top of the hill. The client bought this double block with the idea of doing a subdivision and building properties to overlook the water. What wasn't revealed until the week before settlement, and this is a real deal, we acted for the buyer, we did the searches, the council searches, and there was a sewer main running right down the middle of where that subdivision is going, which impacted the future use. It would not allow that development to happen in the way they intended. This is before this new law kicked in, so they had to settle and they had to sue. And you can imagine that's stressful, expensive, timely, which, when this new disclosure stuff comes out later in the year, the good news is that will be sort of put up front. So that's great because it will disqualify the buyers that, where that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a good point because I just want to sort of flick back. We've talked about conveyance in different states. There is a different conveyance protocol in each state. In Queensland, there are certain minimum tasks that the solicitor has to do in order to transfer the title, which is in essence what a conveyance is to transfer the title from one person to another. There's a minimum number of things that a solicitor must do in that process. And you talked about costs and low cost firms and so forth. And this is a really good question. And we're going to ask you, what sort of questions should people ask? But this is a really good point, is they can do the minimum and get away with it. But what you're suggesting is a good solicitor will do more than the minimum, because more than the minimum is going to arm the people with the right information so they don't make poor decisions.
So the minimum is really scary. Like if you look at Queensland, a really easy example is something like if you're buying in a community title scheme in a body corporate, right? You don't have to do any search beyond a very, very cheap search just to find out the admin and the sinking funds, like the levies, right?
Yeah.
And just so that the client understands, all right, at law, you're going to pay your rates and your water and your body corporate levies. You must know that. There's so much more if you're buying in a body corporate and, you're spending hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of dollars. That's super important that you understand. And we're not talking for much money to get these answers. Like we have a body corporate record search we can order for $300 as the lady we use, and she goes, inspects the records, compiles a report and sends it to us, and then we send that on to the client. That's a super comprehensive report.
Yeah.
Where she even puts in like recommendations and the red flags of what might be wrong with that building, from things like, what's the rules with pets? What's the goal? Is there disputes, X, Y, Z problems? And that's $300. Like if you're spending, say, $1 million on a unit, why aren't you spending
Good investment?
such a cheap cheap piece of for so much information, but those cheaper options where the conveyancer or the lawyer is just saying, oh, we're $600 start to finish and we'll get you settled.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they might not even give the client that option. And that's scary. And then, like you said, Veronica, before, I think you don't know what you don't know. And that's something that when it's all done and dusted and you've moved in and all of a sudden you maybe can't have your dog move in, or you've got all these drugs.
You can only hang your washing on the line on certain days, according to whether you're an odd or even apartment. I mean, these really can be bylaws, and they can affect your livability.
Or park your car on the driveway. Certain communities, especially on the Gold Coast down here where I am, you can't even park your car on the grass or on the street in these gated communities. It has to be on your driveway or in your garage.
Yeah.
So, if you have a big family with a lot of cars, that's a problem. And they'll turn around after the settlement goes through and say to the conveyancer, well, why didn't you tell me this? It's our
Cabin emptor.
Yeah, exactly. Buyer beware. Well, it's our job to say to them, well, hey, here's all the cards in terms of the searches and the options. And like, for example, we do, 200 to 300 deals a month just in Queensland. So this is all we do. Like, we live and breathe Queensland property. We say to them, we strongly suggest A, B, and C search. It's going to cost you $500 total, and it'll give you all the information that you need. You don't have to do it. It's up to you, and we strongly suggest that you do so that you don't come unstuck later.
Yeah, and you even in New South Wales, where you've got lots of documents that are given to you by the agent, you still do need to order extra things such as a strata report. There's additional information that, lots of additional due diligence that we do in our business. And certainly when we're working together with a lawyer or conveyancer, we want to make sure that they're covering off and dovetailing, if you like, the things that extent to where we can go, and then we have to get the legals done. And some things we get checked by the lawyers as well, because we think, oh, we've got something that we discovered we're not really sure about. That's something we need to get advice on, which is actually something else I wanted to ask you about, the difference between conveyancer and lawyer. So I would imagine then there are some quite, and I know that there are no conveyancers in Queensland, so I'm not forgetting that you said that. But if you've gone and done a licensing course to become a conveyancer, I would think that there'd be sometimes aspects of property law that are required for you to venture into if there are certain issues around properties that would be outside the realm of conveyancing or the expertise or the licensing of a conveyancer. Can you give us some sort of examples about where really and truly a lawyer would be a better option?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's again talk in Queensland, where I know it like the back of my hand. You can apply the exact same principle. Our paralegals, which are effectively the conveyancers, right? We have lots of them in our team, and they're amazing. Like, they've got, believe it or not, an experienced paralegal conveyancer that's been doing it as a career conveyancer. Often know more than the lawyers, not all the time, but if they've been in the game a long time, then it's a very specialised area of law, right? So they can do the conveyance, so that legal title transfer, like you ladies said before. Beyond that, in our firm at least, if there's anything that's not a smooth sale, if there's any problem that requires, call it legal advice, is probably the trigger. We need legal advice on something. For example, let's just say we're negotiating a building and pest. There's a building and pest happens, there's a problem, and we want to look at getting the problem fixed or maybe negotiating a purchase price reduction. We have letters of advice that our firm sends that the conveyancer paralegal can send. But beyond that, they work in conjunction with our senior lawyers in our team for that legal advice. Because if there's something that requires legal advice, it's actually not allowed from the Law Society here in Queensland for a non-solicitor to give that legal advice.
Right, yeah.
So that's how we deal with it up here. The paralegal conjuncts with the lawyers, and that's why we have a senior team of solicitors that sit with our paralegals. Even though the paralegal may know that answer or the conveyancer may know the answer, the legal advice has to come from the lawyer. The same as that Form 66W, the waiving of the cooling off, right? I know for a fact my conveyancers, they know how to give that information, but they're not allowed. So it has to come from the lawyer. And I would feel like that same principle will apply down south, where my understanding is the licensed conveyancer may have to put their hand up in the air at some point and refer on to a solicitor if it gets, maybe litigation could be an avenue, or there's problems where legal advice is required. They'd have to work together, or possibly even hand the matter over to a lawyer to take care of it. Veronica, or if you've seen that before down there, on the money, but that'd be my educated guess.
The 66W a licensed conveyancer can sign, so that's the extent of it. In the sense of advice outside, if you like, because for example, we in my area where we have a lot of party walls, a lot of terraces and semi-detached houses with shared walls, right? And so sometimes they have easements on them. And sometimes they don't. So the conveyancer's expertise can usually explain the difference between and the risks associated with having an easement or not having an easement. But sometimes then you get into weird little boundary questions or other easements that are like, it's unclear as to what they actually mean. And so then you can sort of get almost beyond some conveyancers because they're like, whoa, they just haven't come across that before when you got weird things that come up, if you like. But then again, one conveyancers that we've viewed, Jenny Tonner, we've interviewed on the podcast some time ago, she's got like 30 years experience. She's just one of those subject matter experts that, you wouldn't give her, but she also knows what her lane is and she knows exactly when she would, hang on a minute, we need to get some legal advice here. And I think that's really important as well. So you can go really experienced with a conveyancer, but you've got to have someone that is not going to be tempted to try to give you advice outside where they should be giving you advice.
Well, that's a really good point that you guys have raised in terms of knowing your strengths. Like, for example, at Empire, we only want to take on a client where we know we can deliver a 5-star service. And in saying that, you got to stay in your lane. Like, just because we are a fully fledged law firm, but we don't necessarily always complete every conveyance, believe it or not. And I'll give you an example. Say it's getting to the pointy end towards settlement and it looks like someone is going to likely sue somebody else. Mm-hmm. We don't play in that litigation area whatsoever. So we can get the conveyance done, but if it looks like it could be to the detriment of the client, we'll actually hand over to some partners, another law firm. We'll give them a couple of options similar to how you guys operate and say, look, we know A, B, and C litigation lawyers that we trust. Up to you, but we think we should hand the deal over now because it looks like you're going to go down the litigation path, not the right people for that job. So that same knock-on effect works in conveyancer land too. Like that conveyancer probably has all the experience in the world and they probably even know the answer, but maybe their insurer says you can't give that advice, so you've got to pass that along now.
That's so important because we've had, as you say, there's no conveyancers in Queensland. They're all lawyers and paralegals, but we have had occasions where there's been caveats put on properties, mortgagee in possession, they're really complex, very, very complex, and often very intelligent and well-educated people on each side of the argument. And we've even seen some law firms say, look, this is really going to get messy. We really think you need to work with another firm to take it forward because it's a little bit outside of our area of expertise. And I really respect people who can say, I know what I will do well and I know who can do this well for you. So I think that's, we're going to ask you shortly what sort of questions people should ask. But, that would certainly be one is, if this gets tricky, what will happen to my file? Where will it go if it gets tricky?
Yeah, you want professional humility, don't you, really? It's like...
Not numb in with lawyers, let's be honest.
Calling a spade, honestly, I think the curse of the lawyer is there's often egos involved or, I've got a law degree, so I know all the answers. Like, I think you do need to eat a bit of humble pie and say, well, you know what? Unless you're an expert and that's what you do in and out as a practitioner in that area of practice, you're probably doing your client a disservice if you're picking on a matter where you're not well versed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's just quickly run through then some of those questions that you think a buyer should ask of a conveyancer or a lawyer before deciding to work with them.
Okay, I'll rattle off a few that I believe would be the most important. I've already touched on reputation and
Yep.
social proof.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do that due diligence yourself before when you're trying to narrow down who you're going to pick.
Yep.
Even if you do get a professional referral, yeah, like I said, look that up yourself. Heed caution if you get a letterbox drop. I don't know what it's like in the southern states, but there's a whole conveyancing model up here where they see a property is listed for sale and then you conveniently get a letter in the mail saying, we'll do your conveyancing for a very cheap amount. Heed caution. If you do end up getting through and talking to someone when you're trying to make your decision, when you're doing your shortlist, ask them the experience of the team or the person that's going to handle the deal. I think that's a really, really powerful one. Like we said, Meighan, Veronica, you guys could come in today and be running deals at Empire Legal theoretically, but you probably had units of experience in that paralegal capacity, right? Whereas, say, our paralegals have over 10 years of experience, so that they know what they're doing. So that's a really, really key question: is the expertise of the person or the team that's helping you. And also, I think another powerful one is the model of conveyancing or lawyering that's done. And what I mean by that is there's usually two different ways that a client journey will happen. At our firm, we have a dedicated file handler, so the lawyer or the paralegal that looks after the client start to finish. And they even have an assistant that works with them. So you ring and you get Nicole, and Nicole is your contact point from start to finish. Nicole's a paralegal with 20 years experience, and she will be the person there for you. Versus other models, I call it like the conveyor belt model, where you're getting Nicole on a Monday, Sally on a Tuesday, Bob on a Wednesday. You're sort of like a commodity on the belt, and there's no continuity with the deal. And that's how firms can usually offer a cheaper rate. But the downside to that is you don't have one person across your deal, and it can be quite frustrating as an agent or a broker or anyone else in that deal because you don't really have one person you can go to when you need help. That's a huge one. If that's a model, I'd say heed caution because it may not be the best experience.
That's a really good one because I think particularly with first home buyers, you will have lots of questions and you really want somebody who's prepared to take the time to answer them. So I really like that you pulled that one out. Just generally speaking, we talk about cut price sort of conveyancing firms or legal firms. What is a reasonable, and I'm not asking you to say how much people should be charging in the sense that what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, but what's a reasonable range to expect to pay for conveyancing?
I'll talk on Queensland specifically because, to be honest, I'm unsure down south how the pricing is, but I'm well versed up here with what it costs. For example, our firm, and again, full transparency, you can jump on the Empire Legal website now and see the prices yourself. We charge around the $1,000 mark to sell your property. It's $1,200 to be exact, so that's the fee. That's inclusive of the searches and the GST.
Right.
On the purchase side, it's $2,200, so just up to $2,000. Again, inclusive of your searches and your GST. And the last part of what other question you should ask, just to close that off, is pricing, right? So make sure you check when you're selecting someone, is the price, or is it, it's $599 plus searches, plus outlays, plus GST, plus settlement fee, plus, and then what looks like a flyer in the mail for $599 ends up costing you $1,000, and it's just
particularly if it gets complex.
Yeah,
the costs actually add up.
Yes, it do charge for settlement extensions. We don't charge for any of that stuff, but firms do, where it looks cheap. That's a really good point, Meighan. And then you blink and it's like, it's an extension. I'm charging $300 for that.
Or an email that was sent or a telephone call that was made. It's George, I just want to circle back just for our listeners, if they haven't done your first home buyer guide and they don't know, there's two parts often to the solicitor's fees, and some firms will charge them separately. You do it inclusive. So it's a very, very important question to ask, I think, and I'd love you to just tease this out a little bit more, is sometimes the advertised rate is just the professional fees and understanding what's included and excluded and on top of the professional fees. And then the second part is often the outlays. So that's the actual cost of purchasing the searches that you need to do the minimum required for the conveyance to take place. But there are, of course, lots of others that might be on top of that. So some firms will charge a professional fee plus outlays. You're talking about a model where certain searches are included in your full fee, but then there might be others on top if there was others elected.
Yes, great question. So yes, we have like a set of standard searches that are included with that that fixed fee in that 2,200 price range for a purchase, for example. That's a really good point with the professional fees. We've made it one simple price, all inclusive, because otherwise it like I said before, it doesn't seem super genuine, if I can call it that. It's $5.99 for our outlay for our professional fees plus. That's what you need to be careful of. So that is an excellent question when selecting someone, is understanding what will I actually pay at the end of the day. Like, it's great that you've sent me this thing that says $5.99, but is that all I'm paying you, or is that all I'm paying in total? That's critical. Just expanding a little bit more on the searches part on the buy side, the standard searches are a pack of searches that we at our firm have said these are the absolute like minimum standard that you must do. And then in saying that, we like to take a more tailored approach. So we don't do thousands of deals a month by design. We do a smaller amount of volume so that we can give that excellent like boutique style service where we uncover what the client's actually looking to do with the property, like I touched on before. In that conveyor belt model, I think it would be challenging for them when they're doing that many deals to try and personalize and tailor experience. Whereas for us, it's really important. Like, say, Meighan, you've referred a client to us. We want to make sure that we're protecting that client, but also giving that big green tick for their needs. So that question, that golden question I call it, which is like, what's your intended use of the property in the future? Like, what's your plan? Like, not only what's your plan, like, are you going to move into it, but will it become an investment property, or do you want to develop it, or do you want to buy up the properties on either side? Like, what's your goal? Because then that opens up a whole different conversation of possible searches or professional partners. Like, we might say to them, man, you need to talk to a town planner. Like, want to do developing, like, before we go and settle this property, you need to check you can even do what you want to do with it.
Yes.
And that's going to cost extra, like, obviously. Like, we don't charge extra in our fixed fee, but we need to say to them, like, hey, you might need to go and spend thousands of dollars with the town planner. Have you considered that?
Yeah, but it could save you making a mistake of thinking that you could do something with a property when in fact you can't. So I think that those extra questions need that personal interaction, and often in large scale low cost environments, you don't have that personal interaction. It's an email address that is a central sort of email address, and whoever picks up the file on that day picks up the file. And I think property is such a big thing, and we talk about managing your risk and being aware and being alert to things that you don't know by asking enough questions, and having that, I think, incredibly important interaction with the solicitor to ask the extra questions that maybe you don't know to ask yourself.
I think that's a good tip for when you're talking to someone and deciding whether you're going to go with them or not. It's like, how many questions do they ask you?
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, it is a good tip.
Yeah, and I say this with brokers as well, and buyers agents for that matter, because if they're not asking you any questions, they're just telling you what they're going to do for you, then sometimes you think, hang on a minute, you know, there could be things that they should be telling me, but because I don't know to mention it, they're not asking me good questions, so I'm not actually still mentioning it. And then at the end of it all, you get one of those, oh, why didn't you tell me that? It's like, well, you didn't say anything. I was like, well, you didn't ask me and you're the expert. So I think the quality of any service provider's questions is really, really a key, you know, red flag or green flag, depending on how they are.
George, we talked about a lot what a solicitor or a conveyancer will do, but as a buyer, what are some of the things that are unreasonable for them to expect of their legal representative?
That's an excellent question. No one's ever asked me that question before.
I just think that sometimes people think that you should know everything and you can't know things that you don't know about the property itself. So if I can lead you a little bit,
Yep.
If a buyer comes to you and says, what searches should I do on this? It's not reasonable for them to expect you to say, all right, well, we need to check, if the deck's approved or if the pool's got, approval or whatever the case is, unless they raise with you that property has those things.
Yes.
So you can't know what you don't know about the property.
Yeah, there's another golden question, let's call it, that I love that our team ask, which is, do you have any particular concerns? So, not like what are you worried about? That's a great question because people aren't stupid. Like if you're up in Queensland and you're looking at an old Queenslander, you may have this thing in your gut as the buyer going, oh, is there character overlays or is it heritage or this huge tree in the backyard, is that protected? Like, there's no way that George Sourris at Empire Legal is going to know what's wrong with this property if I've never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a whole different layer with a buyer's agent because you guys are sort of zooming right in on this particular property and doing your due diligence. As a conveyancer or the lawyer on the deal, we don't see this property. We might just Google it and have a look, but I'm not going to know if it's, an old heritage house or if there's a problem within the fence or the backyard with a tree or anything like that.
It's been extended or built under or...
Yeah, legal. If you're that buyer and you've walked through and the roof looks a bit low and you're like, oh, is that legal height? Like, I'm not going to know that, and I'm not going to have any clue that you're even worried about that unless you bring it to our attention. So we asked that question on the discovery call, but we also have on our questionnaire that powerful golden question of, do you have any other concerns? Because that's a really big flag for us to go, stop. This is something the client's stressed about. Let's give them some peace of mind, or let's order this search, or ring the buyer's agent if there is a buyer's agent and go, hey, client's stressed about this. Do you guys have any answers, or what can we do to find this answer together? That's a good one, is what bringing that to our attention, because we will never know. Does that add a bit of value?
Definitely.
I'm just unsure that the high volume guys would maybe have that question, or even if they had it on a tick and flick, I'm unsure if it would be a one-on-one discussion like this where it's unpacked.
Yeah. No, definitely not. And in fact, I know that there are some conveyancers and lawyers, they will say, give me the address, give me the link, give me a brochure, whatever. I'm going to just at least look at what you think you're buying versus what you are buying, and raise things that are missing. You think you're getting this and that's not whatever it is. I mean, I've got a good example about where I was looking. Actually, was on the show. I think I've told the story before on the podcast. It was a townhouse or a villa unit actually in Byron Bay, and it was advertised with this courtyard on title. I looked at the strata plan in the contract, which of course we get, New South Wales, and there's no courtyard. In their unit lot entitlement, that was not there, right? So then I go, okay, well, look for bylaws. Is there a bylaw? And there was, but it was for half of what they thought what they were advertising. And this had been sold before to the current owner with exactly the same documentation, exactly the same expectation that they were getting a big courtyard. And actually that person had bought it none the wiser. Their lawyer, they'd been through 2 lots of lawyers. No one had picked it up. So, and that's because the lawyers weren't asking that question, and I asked it, so all of a sudden it's, the cat's amongst pigeons. So that's just one example. It's a very easy, and you could see how it could just go from conveyance to conveyance, from transaction to transaction. It's just passed on, and then no one can remember exactly who got thing done, who put the fence there in the first place.
Yeah. and that's a good one for people. I go to barbecues and you hear people say, oh, the solicitor didn't tell me that the deck wasn't approved. Well, did you ask? It's on you. How would the solicitor know that there was a deck there?
Yeah, and Meighan, you're right. Like in Queensland, that doesn't even give you termination rights if it's uncovered. So that's another little nuance for Queensland is, we're not even looking for that. Because you got no contractual right.
No.
So
and there's no disclosure requirement around it.
correct, and you're only going to get it by paying for a search, which most people don't want to spend the money on unnecessary searching. So unless it's something you're concerned about, or a seasoned buyer's agent going, you know what, this looks like an extension, let's check if that's all tick 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 when it was meant to be.
Yep. Yeah, it's scary. It's scary what can get missed, and I think assuming your conveyancer or your lawyer is going to pick that up is obviously a big danger zone.
Yeah.
You've got to take responsibility, buyers. You're the one who's going to be living with this responsibility of this property and the obligation of this property. And this is something that is not totally outsourced to your lawyer. So that's sort of fundamentally the answer to that question, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. So another question we have for you, and it's our last question there, George, is, and we ask every guest this, is what is the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were a first home buyer?
Ooh, good question. When I was a first home buyer.
Can you remember that funny fact?
I wasn't going to miss that line.
Headed there minutes ago. The biggest piece of advice that I think I'm now armed with that maybe I wasn't back then in my mid-20s was it's okay to not be pressured by a seller's agent. Like it's okay. And I don't mean disrespect, because there's something amazing sellers agents out there. We work with hundreds of them.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there are pushy agents who may create false senses of urgency to try and buyer, especially a green first home buyer who doesn't even know what day of the week it is, doesn't even understand about finance or whatever it may be. Sign process, yeah. Even the enforceability of like, what happens if I sign this? Like, you've actually signed a contract. Some people don't understand. It's okay to put your hand up and say, I actually just want to get my lawyer to look at this first.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, there's a good chance that they will get met with objection at that point by that agent. And that's normal, especially up here in Queensland. They'll say, oh, it's a
You don't need to.
Yeah, don't worry.
Straightforward, standard contract.
Yeah, you better quickly sign it. Otherwise, the other guys are going to buy it.
Yeah.
You know what? Luckily, my mother's a property lawyer, and I was very well looked after with my purchase. I had mum in my corner, which was amazing. Like I cheated a little bit because I just relied on her to look after me. But knowing what I know now, my advice to the first home buyers listening is it's okay just to say to that agent, like, I am a genuine buyer. I'm interested. I just need to get my lawyer to look at this, because I promise you, if you've never bought a property before, or even if you have, if you read the pre-contract advice that a good solicitor will give you, there's going to be more than one thing in there that you're going to want to know. It's a whole suite of information to protect you and look after you. That's that buyer's solicitor's job. All they care about is legally protecting you, and I promise you'll get value out of it. And the flip side is you get scared and you get pressured and you sign, and then, like we were talking about those horror stories earlier in the piece, you may have some sleepless nights or stressful nights. Even deposits, if you miss a deposit date here in Queensland, it's forfeitable.
Yep. We're actually doing an episode on that next week, so tune in next week. We'll be delving into a recent case.
That'll be awesome for you guys, because, there was a case only, well, you know what, I'm not going to...
It's the one we're going to delve into. We're going to talk about
and I'll leave it there. So that's my advice, is don't be afraid to say, I just want my lawyer to check it out, and lean on advisors, be it your buyer's agent, your broker, your solicitor. These guys are all there in your corner. The seller's agent works for the seller.
That's exactly right.
Great advice.
And
love it.
Thank you so much, George. I've heard about you. I've watched your videos, and now it's great to meet you in person. I know that Meighan speaks very highly of you. So thanks for your time. And for the listeners, have you joined our Facebook group yet? It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia. That's a lot of syllables. And it is your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions. And you will get answers to those questions from us Or if it's outside our lane, we call on people like George to give answers. And this all means that you'll be sure that you're not going to get led down the garden path by incorrect advice given in the form of answers by other well-meaning members. So encourage you to join us.
Yeah, now, quick note, you might think that we cover everything you need to know in these podcasts, but a word of warning, we don't. We just scratch the surface. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
And, our course, which is called Your First Home Buyer Guide, it only costs $990. You get direct access to both Meighan and myself. Every week we meet you. Every Wednesday we meet you. We help you, guide you through your negotiations. We can look at the links of any property that you're looking at and give you an idea of whether it's A, B, C, or don't go there at all under any circumstances zone. And trust me, you will buy a lot better with our guidance, and you'll overpay by a hell of a lot more than the cost of the course if you don't know what you're doing.
Absolutely. And we have 3 students going to auction this Saturday. So I just did campfire with 3 of them. And they are well in control of every part of the process and what they're going to do.
Primed.
Very excited.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, George.
See you, George. Thank you.
Happy me. I hope that helped, and anyone can reach out to me as well.
Fabulous.
Anyone listening has any burning questions on the back of this, it's on my website, george@empirelegal.com.au. We're friendly. We want to help out however we can.
We'll have your company link in the show notes as well, so people will be able to click through and chat to you.
Well, thank you for having me on. I hope the listeners got some value out of this.
Great. Thanks, George.
Thanks.
Thank you.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out Your First Home Buyer Guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.